For 16 years, I believed Margot and I had built something unshakable. A marriage built on love, a home filled with laughter, and 3 children who completed our world. It was the kind of life people envied, steady and idyllic. Then, on a seemingly calm evening, she tore it apart with 7 devastating words. Richard is their biological father, not you. At first, I laughed, thinking she was making one of her biting jokes, the kind that had once endeared me to her sharp wit. But when I met her eyes, her expression was cold, unyielding, and far too serious. It wasn't a joke. Her words hit me like heavy stones, crushing my chest and leaving me gasping for air. She confessed everything without guilt or hesitation, her tone devoid of remorse. Richard, the man I'd welcomed into our lives as a family friend, had been seeing her for years. Now, he was moving to Portland, and she had decided to leave with him. She insisted that Adam and Noah deserved to know their real father. Her words so clinical, so calculated, that I barely recognized the woman speaking them. Upstairs, Bella, our daughter, was in her room with her headphones on, unaware of the implosion unfolding beneath her feet. My mind spiraled, searching desperately for a way to protect her, to shield Adam and Noah from the truth that would fracture their sense of family forever. I begged for answers, for any trace of the woman I had once loved. But Margot was unyielding, justifying her betrayal as if it were an inevitable next step. She dismissed the enormity of her deception, claiming she had only withheld the truth, not lied. It was as if she had decided long ago that her happiness justified this destruction. I stood there, frozen, as she calmly collected her belongings. Her indifference stung almost as much as the betrayal itself. It wasn't just that she had broken my trust. It was the ease with which she dismantled everything we had built, leaving me alone to pick up the pieces. That night, sleep was impossible. I sat in the living room, the weight of Margot's words pressing down on me. Upstairs, she was packing for her new life with Richard, the man she claimed was the real father of my sons. My thoughts spiraled in an endless loop of questions without answers. Had I missed the signs? In hindsight, there were cracks in the foundation of our marriage, small fractures I had dismissed as part of the natural wear and tear of a long relationship. The subtle distance she had put between us, her occasional evasiveness about trips out of town. Her phone was always face down on the counter, a habit I'd once attributed to her valuing privacy. I now saw it as something else entirely. And then there was Richard. He had been part of our lives for years, seamlessly weaving himself into birthdays, barbecues, and holiday dinners. I had considered him a friend, never suspecting his intentions. Looking back, I felt like a fool for inviting him into my home, for letting him near my children. Were they still mine in any meaningful sense? The question lingered like a bitter taste I couldn't swallow. My thoughts turned to Bella, my sweet 14-year-old daughter. She adored her brothers and worshipped her mother. How would she react when she learned the truth about her family? I imagined her heart breaking in the same way mine had, and the thought twisted my stomach into knots. Above me, faint sounds of suitcases being zipped carried through the house. Margot was leaving tonight, not even waiting for morning. Her decisiveness stung almost as much as her betrayal, as though the life we had built together was nothing more than a loose end she was eager to tie up. When she appeared in the doorway, dragging her luggage behind her, my anger flared. The weight of her indifference to everything we'd built together became unbearable. The quiet sound of her car pulling away moments later was deafening, leaving me standing alone in the empty house, paralyzed by the finality of it all. After Margot left, the silence was suffocating. It wasn't just the absence of her voice or the hum of her car fading into the distance. It was the quiet of a life shattered, every piece now sharp and jagged. I stayed in the living room, unmoving, staring into the dark void of the night, until Bella's soft footsteps broke the stillness. She appeared in the doorway, her face shadowed with worry, trying to make sense of the tension that lingered in the air. I could see the questions already forming in her mind. Slowly, I told her the truth in the gentlest terms I could muster. Her mother had left, and she wasn't coming back. At first, her expression was a mix of confusion and disbelief. But as the weight of my words sank in, the confusion turned to something darker. Bella's voice trembled as she sought an explanation, pressing for answers I struggled to give. I admitted Margot had chosen someone else, not just over me, but seemingly over all of us. The betrayal hit Bella hard. Her composure cracked, and tears welled in her eyes as the reality set in. She asked if Margot's decision meant Adam and Noah would be leaving too. her voice barely above a whisper. I could only promise her that I would fight with everything I had to keep our family together, even as the words felt like they might crumble under the weight of uncertainty. Her small body trembled as she cried, and I held her close, feeling utterly powerless to take her pain away. For the first time, I saw how deeply this would ripple through her, through all of us. When she finally pulled back, her tear-streaked face was set with a fragile resolve. She muttered that we didn't need Margot, but the heartbreak woven into her words was impossible to miss. As much as I despised Margot for what she had done, I couldn't deny the void she had left behind. It was a wound that would take time to heal, if it ever truly could. The next morning, reality settled on me like a suffocating weight. I woke up on the couch, my neck stiff from an uneasy sleep. Bella's music filtered faintly from her room upstairs, her way of coping with the chaos, shutting out the world. Meanwhile, I sat in the kitchen, staring into my coffee, trying to figure out how to explain Margot's absence to Adam and Noah. The sound of their footsteps broke through my haze, their chatter and laughter a jarring contrast to the storm swirling in my mind. They moved through their morning routine effortlessly, pouring cereal, searching for the milk, as if nothing had changed. Watching them made the gap between their innocence and the truth even harder to bear. When Adam casually asked where Margot was, I struggled to find the words. I gave them a vague explanation, framing her departure as temporary. But their questions kept coming, each one probing deeper, forcing me to edge closer to the truth. Noah, sharp and unrelenting, sensed the cracks in my story and pressed harder. His frustration turned into anger, a mix of confusion and hurt that was impossible to shield him from. For Adam, the realization was quieter but no less painful. He pushed his cereal bowl aside, his appetite gone, and muttered something about her leaving them. I tried to reassure them both, to shoulder the blame and soften the blow, but my words felt hollow even to me. Noah's skepticism cut the deepest, his growing belief that love shouldn't be conditional, that a mother who truly cared wouldn't leave. The morning dragged on in a tense, heavy silence. Adam retreated to his room, shutting the door on his emotions. Noah buried himself in a video game, the clicks of the controller the only sound from him. Bella surfaced briefly, her face drawn, avoiding any interaction before disappearing again. The emptiness in the house was suffocating. I sat alone in the kitchen, gripping my coffee mug as if it could anchor me. Margot had ripped a hole through our family, leaving chaos in her wake. But even as the weight of it bore down on me, I knew I couldn't let it define us. Somehow, I had to take control, to piece together the fragments she had left behind for my children and for myself. That afternoon, I decided to face Richard. Since Margot walked out, anger had been building inside me, and I needed answers, or maybe just a place to direct my fury. I wasn't entirely sure what I hoped to achieve, but before I knew it, I was gripping the steering wheel, parked outside his sleek, modern home. The house exuded the kind of arrogance that matched everything I now associated with him. When he opened the door, his expression was predictably smug, a mix of feigned surprise and self-satisfaction. He stepped aside to let me in, his casual demeanor adding fuel to the fire already burning within me. Inside, the house was polished to perfection, cold, pristine, and devoid of warmth, just like the man himself. The tension in the room was palpable as we sat in his living room. He tried to mask his calm with faux understanding, as though he were the reasonable one in this betrayal. His words dripped with justification, framing the affair as an unfortunate but inevitable choice, one born of love and Margot's supposed unhappiness. Hearing his excuses only deepened my resentment. The man who had been in my home, laughing with my children, sitting at my dinner table, spoke as though I had somehow failed Margot, as though her betrayal was a result of my shortcomings rather than their deceit. He minimized the devastation they'd caused, brushing it off as a byproduct of a love they hadn't planned for, but now couldn't deny. Every word he spoke pushed me closer to the edge. The sheer audacity of him, trying to rationalize the destruction of my family, ignited a fury I hadn't felt before. But even as my fists clenched, I held myself back. Violence wouldn't change anything, and it certainly wouldn't give me the upper hand. Instead, I stood, making it clear that while Margot might have chosen him, he would never have the bond one shared with my children. My warning was plain. The fight wasn't over, and I wouldn't let him or Margot erase me from their lives. For the first time, his confident facade faltered, though he quickly masked it with indifference. Leaving his house, I felt my hands trembling, but not from fear. The confrontation had solidified something within me: resolve. Richard might have taken Margot, but my children were still mine, and I would fight with everything I had to keep it that way. When I returned home, Bella was waiting in the living room. The tension in her stance, arms crossed tightly over her chest, was unmistakable. She wasn't just upset. She was furious. Her gaze bore into me, demanding an explanation. I admitted where I had been and why, confessing my visit to Richard in a desperate attempt to understand. But my reasoning didn't soften the anger in her eyes. She couldn't see how facing him could possibly fix what had already been destroyed. Her frustration spilled over as she questioned how I could have missed the signs, her voice laced with both hurt and accusation. Her words hit me with a force I wasn't prepared for. There was no defense I could offer that wouldn't sound hollow. She was right. I hadn't seen it. The betrayal had blindsided me as much as it had her, and I couldn't help but feel I had failed her, Adam, and Noah. Bella's anger cracked, giving way to tears as the weight of everything bore down on her. She collapsed onto the couch, her sobs shaking her small frame. I hesitated for a moment before sitting beside her, placing a tentative hand on her shoulder. Words felt inadequate, but I told her what I could, that I wouldn't let this family fall apart, that I would fight for us. She didn't respond immediately, her sobs gradually softening into silence. When she finally lifted her head, her face was streaked with tears, her red-rimmed eyes burning with a new resolve. She whispered the depth of her pain, admitting the hatred she felt toward her mother for what she had done. I could only tell her the truth, that forgiveness wasn't something she had to give now, or perhaps ever, but that she shouldn't let that hate consume her. It wouldn't help her heal. Bella stared at me, searching for reassurance in my words. When she finally spoke again, it wasn't with anger, but a quiet plea not to let her down. I promised her I wouldn't, and this time, I meant it with everything I had. She wiped her eyes and asked about her brothers, wondering if they knew the truth. I admitted that they didn't, not yet. They were too young to understand the full weight of what had happened, but she insisted they deserved to know someday. Her conviction left me torn. Telling Adam and Noah the truth felt like robbing them of what little innocence they still had. But Bella was right about one thing. Secrets wouldn't protect them forever. At some point, I would have to face that. When Bella retreated to her room, I was left alone in the silence of the living room. The enormity of what Margot had done settled over me again. But this time, I felt a flicker of determination. She had left behind a fractured family, but the task of rebuilding it was now mine. For Bella, for Adam and Noah, and for myself, I would find a way to put the pieces back together. The next day, I decided it was time to take control. My children deserved clarity, even if the truth would hurt. Sitting back and letting Margot's betrayal dictate our lives wasn't an option. After breakfast, I began sorting through some of the things she had left behind. In her rush to leave, she hadn't taken everything. Journals, a shoebox of photographs, and piles of paperwork still cluttered the drawers and shelves. It felt intrusive, sifting through her belongings, but I needed answers. I had to understand how long this had been going on, and maybe even why. In the back of her desk drawer, I found a crumpled receipt from a boutique hotel in the city. The date was nearly 3 years old, and the reservation was under Richard Taylor's name. The discovery hit me like a cold slap. For 3 years, she had carried on with him, right under my nose. Determined, I kept digging. Her abandoned tablet held more breadcrumbs, text messages, photos saved in her cloud, and emails that painted a devastating picture. This wasn't a brief fling. It was a full-blown relationship, spanning years, built on lies and secrecy. One email in particular stood out. Dated just a week before she left, it was from Richard. His words, written with confidence, carried an unbearable finality. He declared it was time to stop hiding, to tell Adam and Noah the truth about their paternity. He wanted Margot to be free, and by extension, he wanted to take my sons as well. The fury that surged through me was unlike anything I'd ever felt. Richard wasn't just content to steal my wife. He was trying to erase me from my children's lives. Every scraped knee, every late night spent comforting them through illness, every science project. I had been there for it all. And now, he wanted to claim the life I had built as his own. The sound of my phone buzzing broke through my thoughts. A message from Bella appeared. "I need to talk to you. Can we go for a drive?" I grabbed my keys and found her waiting in her room, her expression heavy with something she needed to share. We drove for a while in silence, the hum of the engine filling the void. Finally, Bella spoke. She confessed that a few months ago, she had seen Margot at a coffee shop with someone. At first, she thought little of it, but then she saw the kiss. She had hoped it was a mistake or a one-time lapse, but when she saw Margot with him again, she realized it was more. It had been Richard all along. Her admission hung between us, thick and suffocating. I asked her why she hadn't told me sooner, though I already knew the answer. She hadn't wanted to hurt me. She had wanted to believe it wasn't real. But when Margot left, all doubt had vanished. I pulled the car over, turning to face her as she asked the question that broke me. Why hadn't we been enough? What had Margot been searching for that we couldn't give her? I reached for her hand, grasping for the right words. None seemed adequate. This wasn't about Bella or the family we'd built. This was about Margot's selfish choices. I told her she was more than enough, a truth I hoped she would hold on to, even as the pain lingered in her eyes. As we sat there, I realized I didn't have all the answers. But one thing was certain. I wouldn't let Margot and Richard reshape the narrative of our family. This was my fight, and I wasn't going to lose it. Not for Bella. Not for Adam and Noah. Not for any of us. By the time we got home, Bella seemed steadier, but the weight of everything still lingered in her posture. She retreated to her room without a word. In the kitchen, Adam and Noah were finishing lunch, their laughter over some shared joke a jarring contrast to the storm brewing in my head. I knew I couldn't keep them in the dark forever. Margot and Richard's intentions were clear enough, and if they planned to take the boys, I had to be ready. I needed a plan, a way to protect my family. That afternoon, I contacted a family lawyer. Karen Whitman's office was sparse, but her reputation was solid. As I laid out everything, Margot's sudden departure, Richard's involvement, and the mounting evidence of their long-term betrayal, Karen listened with quiet focus. When she finally spoke, her assessment was blunt but steadying. Margot had legal rights as their mother, and Richard, as their biological father, could petition for involvement. But she emphasized that my role as their father for the past 14 years carried significant weight. Courts, she assured me, didn't look kindly on attempts to erase a parent's established role in a child's life. The path forward was clear. Filing for primary custody and gathering evidence to show that stability, not upheaval, was what my children needed. Karen outlined what would strengthen my case. Records of Margot's absence, her lack of communication, and the emotional and practical support I provided daily. Every interaction would matter. Every piece of documentation would build the foundation for my argument. Her advice brought a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. For too long, I'd been reacting to the chaos Margot had created. Now, I had a purpose, a way to fight back. At home, Bella noticed the shift in me almost immediately. She asked what had changed, and I told her I'd spoken to a lawyer and was moving forward with filing for custody. The relief in her expression was undeniable, though it was tinged with worry. She, too, had been anticipating Margot's next move, and we both knew it wouldn't take long for her to act. That evening, I began compiling everything Karen had asked for. The emails and receipts I had found earlier became the first pieces of evidence. Calendar entries Margot had forgotten to delete were added to the pile. Each item felt like another brick in the wall I was building to protect my family. But Margot was always one step ahead. The next morning she called. Her tone was calm, almost unnervingly so, as she brought up the boys. She suggested they stay with her and Richard for a while, framing it as an opportunity for Adam and Noah to know their real father. The words landed like a blow. After everything, she still had the audacity to dismiss the years I'd spent raising them as though they were insignificant. Her calm gave way to something sharper when I pushed back, questioning how she could justify such a suggestion. She insisted this was about the boys' best interests, a phrase she wielded like a weapon. Her implication was clear. If I didn't cooperate, the courts would decide. The line had been drawn. As I hung up, my hands trembled with anger, but my resolve was stronger than ever. If Margot wanted to fight, I was ready for it. My children deserved better than the instability she and Richard offered, and I would do whatever it took to protect them. Margot's call set everything into motion. Over the next few days, paperwork and preparation consumed my time. Karen moved swiftly, filing the custody petition and securing a temporary order to keep the kids in my care until the hearing. It was a small but crucial victory, offering a fragile sense of stability in the chaos. While the legal steps progressed, I knew the more challenging task lay with Adam and Noah. They deserved the truth, or at least as much as they could handle. One evening, I gathered them in the living room. Bella sat with us, her quiet presence a source of strength. Sensing the seriousness of the moment, Adam and Noah settled into their seats, their usual chatter fading into expectant silence. Carefully, I explained Margot's absence, framing her decision as one driven by her desire to start a new life. The revelation hung heavy in the air. Adam seemed confused, his expression distant as he processed the words. Noah, however, was angrier, his emotions spilling over in sharp questions about how a mother could abandon her family. They needed reassurance, and I did my best to provide it. I told them they mattered more than anything and promised that I wasn't going anywhere. When Adam quietly asked about Richard, the weight of his question struck me, but I answered honestly. I explained that Richard was their biological father, but emphasized that biology didn't change the years of love and commitment I'd poured into raising them. Adam's response was a mix of sadness and resolve, his quiet declaration that he didn't want to live with a man he didn't even know. Noah, still pacing the room, hardened with determination, insisting that their mother couldn't simply uproot them for someone like Richard. Bella, who had been listening silently, reached out to her brothers, assuring them that they would face this together, as a family. For the first time in weeks, a faint sense of unity emerged among us. We were bruised, but not broken. The next morning, Karen called with an update. The temporary custody order had been secured, ensuring that Margot and Richard couldn't take the kids until the hearing. But her tone carried a warning. Margot's legal team would attempt to frame her as the victim, a mother forced to leave in pursuit of happiness and stability. The idea infuriated me. How could someone who had abandoned her family so thoroughly twist the narrative to make herself look sympathetic? Karen reminded me that the truth mattered less than perception in court. Our focus had to remain on the children and their well-being. Everything I did from that moment forward needed to reinforce the consistency and support I provided for them. After the call, I sat in silence, the weight of the battle ahead pressing down on me. Margot had already taken so much, my trust, my marriage, my peace of mind. But my children were a line I wouldn't allow her to cross. This fight wasn't just about keeping them with me. It was about protecting the life we had built together. For them, I couldn't afford to lose. The temporary custody order was a small but crucial victory, yet I knew it was only the beginning. A week later, Karen called with the news I had been expecting but dreading. Margot had filed her response. She was claiming emotional instability on my part and accusing me of alienating the kids from her. Karen warned that Margot's legal team would argue I was influencing the children's feelings, turning their anger into a weapon against her. The burden would be on us to counter that narrative, to show that their emotions were their own and that I was focused solely on supporting them. Her advice was clear: document everything. From their routines to my interactions with them, every detail mattered. The knot of anxiety in my chest grew tighter. It was one thing to fight for my children in court, but Margot's tactics felt like an invasion into the fragile peace we'd been trying to rebuild. A few days later, she proved how far she was willing to go. Margot showed up unannounced at the house, her polished appearance a sharp contrast to the upheaval she had left behind. Bella was the first to see her and froze, caught between anger and disbelief as Margot made her way to the front steps. Her smile was strained, and her request to come in felt more like a demand than a plea. Bella, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, didn't budge. The tension between them was palpable. When I appeared at the door, my chest tightened at the sight of Margot, standing there as if she still belonged. She insisted on seeing the kids, framing it as her right, her tone sharpening as I reminded her of the court order. The calm facade she had walked in with began to crack as I refused to let her disrupt their lives on a whim. She accused me of poisoning the kids against her, her voice low and venomous. Her words stung, but I held my ground, refusing to engage beyond the boundaries Karen had advised. If the children saw the truth, it wasn't because of me. It was because of her choices. For a moment, something like regret flickered across her face, but it was gone almost as quickly as it came. She turned and left without another word, her car pulling away as I stood on the porch, my heart pounding. Inside, Bella was by the window, her arms wrapped around herself protectively. Her voice was soft, almost distant, as she commented on how different her mother seemed. I placed a hand on her shoulder, assuring her that while Margot might have changed, we would get through this together. Bella nodded, but her eyes remained clouded, the cracks in her armor painfully visible. Margot's visit had shaken her more than she wanted to admit, and I could feel the ripples it would send through all of us. That night, I called Karen to report what had happened. Her reaction was measured, though she noted that Margot's unannounced visit could actually strengthen our case. Documenting every detail, the timing, Margot's behavior, and how the kids reacted would help us paint a clear picture of the instability she brought into their lives. I spent the evening writing it all down. Every word, every action, every flicker of emotion. As I documented the events, my resolve solidified. Margot had left us fractured, but I was determined to keep what was left of our family intact, no matter what tactics she tried to use against us. Margot's unannounced visit sent ripples through the house. Ripples I couldn't ignore. Bella withdrew further into herself, her silence speaking volumes. Even Adam and Noah, who had managed to maintain some sense of normalcy, now seemed more subdued, their unease lingering like a shadow. It became clear that I couldn't navigate this on my own. I needed more than Karen's legal expertise. I needed someone who truly understood what we were going through. That's when I thought of Morgan. We had met at a local support group for those reeling from betrayal. At first, I'd been reluctant to share, but listening to Morgan's story had changed that. His wife's infidelity had blindsided him, much like Margot's had blindsided me. His courage in opening up gave me the push I needed, and since then, we had kept in touch sporadically. I called him, and after a brief hesitation, I found myself spilling everything. Margot's betrayal, her attempts to take Adam and Noah, and the custody battle looming on the horizon. Morgan listened without interruption, offering quiet understanding as I poured out the frustrations and fears that had been building. When I finished, he reminded me that I wasn't alone, offering his support and a standing invitation to come by his garage if I ever needed to clear my head. The next day, I took him up on his offer. The garage was a small, unassuming space on the edge of town, filled with the comforting smell of grease and the hum of tools at work. Morgan greeted me with a firm handshake and a knowing look, sensing the turmoil I carried. As we worked side by side on a vintage car he was restoring, I told him about Bella's quiet anger and the boys' growing confusion. He listened carefully, occasionally sharing advice or reflecting on his own experiences. He urged me to focus on being steady for the kids, reminding me that more than anything, they needed stability. His words hit home. I had been so caught up in my own emotions that I hadn't fully realized how much they were looking to me for reassurance. Before I left, Morgan handed me an old wrench, a playful grin softening the gravity of the day. He told me to keep it as a reminder. When life felt like it was falling apart, there was always something worth fixing. It wouldn't solve everything, but it would keep me grounded. That evening, I felt a subtle but meaningful shift in myself. The despair that had been clinging to me like a second skin began to lift. Morgan's words had given me a new sense of purpose. I wasn't just fighting against Margot and Richard. I was fighting for my kids, for our life, for the chance to rebuild something stronger. I spent the rest of the night fully present with the children. I helped Adam with his math homework, played video games with Noah, and sat quietly with Bella as she painted. For the first time in what felt like forever, laughter filled the house, a sound that felt like sunlight breaking through a storm. Margot had abandoned us, but we still had each other. That realization solidified my resolve. Whatever battles lay ahead, this was something worth fighting for. The fragile calm didn't last. Margot's next move arrived as a letter, hand-delivered by a courier and addressed to Adam and Noah. Bella intercepted it before they could see, bringing it to me with a mixture of anger and disgust. The envelope felt heavier than paper should, weighted by the intentions behind it. Opening it carefully, I braced myself as I read her deliberate handwriting. The words were dripping with emotional manipulation, cloaked in concern but layered with self-serving motives. Margot spoke of missing the boys, professing her love, and framing Richard as someone waiting eagerly to be part of their lives. She even claimed there was room in their hearts for both fathers, painting a picture of harmony that ignored the destruction she had caused. I crumpled the letter, fury rising as I recognized the ploy for what it was, a blatant attempt to guilt Adam and Noah into accepting her new narrative. It wasn't about their well-being. It was about her absolving herself of guilt and justifying the choices she had made. Bella's expression was tight with frustration, and I reassured her that the letter would never reach her brothers. It was clear that Margot was attempting to rewrite the family dynamic to suit her own needs. But as much as I wanted to destroy the letter outright, I knew it was evidence of her interference. Any misstep on my part could be used against me in court. That evening, I sat down with Adam and Noah. Though I didn't mention the letter, it felt like the right time to address the tension in the air. I acknowledged the confusion and hurt they must be feeling, emphasizing that they didn't need to choose sides. Their emotions, whatever they might be, were valid. Noah, unable to hide his frustration, asked if Margot was ever coming back. The question carried a mix of hope and bitterness that was heartbreaking. I told them gently that she wasn't, while reassuring them that her love for them hadn't changed, even if her actions had hurt us all. Adam's voice, quiet but insistent, broke the silence as he questioned why she had chosen Richard. It wasn't an easy question to answer, but I explained that sometimes people make selfish decisions, believing it will bring them happiness. Those choices, I emphasized, didn't reflect on the boys or the love we had as a family. Noah's response was resolute. He didn't care about Richard because Richard wasn't his dad. That honor, he made clear, belonged to me. His words struck deep, grounding me in the moment and giving me a renewed sense of purpose. Later that evening, Bella came to me with an idea. She suggested we write letters, not to Margot, but to one another. It was her way of strengthening the bonds we still had, a reminder of what remained despite the chaos Margot had left behind. Her idea filled me with a quiet hope, and together, we spent the evening putting our thoughts and feelings onto paper. When we shared the letters, the room felt lighter, the connection between us stronger than it had been in weeks. Margot could try to manipulate from a distance, but she couldn't touch the foundation we were rebuilding. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and it was worth every ounce of the fight ahead. The memory of the letter was still fresh when Margot showed up again, uninvited and resolute. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon, with the kids playing in the backyard. Bella spotted her first and rushed inside, her frustration evident. She didn't need to explain. The tension in her voice said it all. When I opened the door, Margot stood there, immaculate as always, but something about her seemed unsteady. The confidence she so often wore like armor appeared to be cracking at the edges. Without preamble, she stated her intention to see the children. Her tone carried an air of entitlement, as though her decisions hadn't already caused enough harm. I stepped outside, closing the door firmly behind me. She insisted that she had a right to see them, but I reminded her that those rights had come with responsibilities she had abandoned. Her presence wasn't a request. It was an intrusion, and I told her as much. For a fleeting moment, her composure faltered. She admitted she was trying to make amends, her voice tinged with something close to regret. But her attempt to position Richard as part of that reconciliation only reignited my anger. She wanted the children to see him as a father, to accept him into the role I had spent years fulfilling. I refused, making it clear that biology didn't erase the countless days and nights I'd spent raising them, loving them. Her frustration returned, sharp and defensive. She warned that if I continued to shut her out, she'd have no choice but to escalate the situation legally. Her words were calculated, meant to unsettle me, but I stood firm. If the courts were to judge us, they would see who had prioritized the children's needs and who had chosen to abandon them. After she left, Bella approached me in the kitchen, her expression a mix of curiosity and guarded emotion. She wanted to know why Margot had come and what she had hoped to achieve. When I explained that Margot had asked to see her and her brothers, Bella's reaction was resolute. She wasn't ready, not after everything their mother had done. Her question, though, lingered in my mind. Did Margot truly care about them? Or was this another attempt to soothe her own guilt? I admitted that Margot might care, but her actions showed a deep misunderstanding of the damage she'd caused. Bella's response was firm. She wasn't ready to forgive and didn't know if she ever would. I assured her that was her choice to make and that her feelings mattered more than her mother's wants. That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed the encounter in my mind. Margot's veneer of confidence, her attempts to justify her actions. Was it guilt driving her or self-preservation? Whatever the reason, I knew one thing. I wouldn't let her disrupt the fragile stability we had begun to rebuild. My focus had to remain on the kids, on providing them with the security Margot had stripped away. No matter how many times she tried to reinsert herself into their lives, I would ensure they had a foundation strong enough to withstand it. Just as I thought I prepared myself for anything Margot and Richard might throw our way, another blow arrived, a formal letter from Richard's lawyer. The contents were clear and deliberate. Richard was filing a petition for visitation rights. I read the document twice, disbelief quickly giving way to anger. The claim that it was in Adam and Noah's best interest to establish a relationship with their biological father felt hollow and audacious. Richard had been absent for 14 years, yet now he wanted to stake a claim in their lives, as if fatherhood were a title he could demand after ignoring its responsibilities. Shaking, I called Karen to relay the news. Her calm professionalism helped temper my spiraling emotions. She explained that this was a calculated move, likely pushed by Margot, to solidify Richard's role in their narrative. It was possible he could secure visitation, but not guaranteed. The court would weigh the emotional well-being of the boys and the stability they already had in my care. My years as their father, in every way that mattered, were a powerful counter to Richard's sudden involvement. Karen's reassurances helped, but doubt lingered. The idea of Adam and Noah being forced to meet Richard unsettled me deeply. What if he managed to charm them, to carve out a space in their lives that wasn't his to claim? The thought gnawed at me for the rest of the day. That evening, I sat the kids down to explain what was happening. Bella, always perceptive, stayed close, her silent support a steadying force. Adam and Noah listened as I told them about Richard's petition, their expressions shifting from confusion to frustration. Noah was the first to speak up, his resistance clear. Adam, quieter but no less resolute, reminded me that I was their dad, no one else. Their words gave me strength. I assured them that their voices would matter, and that I would make sure the court understood how they felt. Bella, with her usual quiet intensity, spoke up to reinforce that they didn't owe Richard anything. Her unwavering loyalty seemed to solidify Adam and Noah's resolve. The next day, I met with Karen to plan our strategy. She emphasized the importance of documenting everything. The boys' routines, their emotional responses to the upheaval Margot and Richard had caused, and any resistance they expressed about meeting Richard. The goal was to show that forcing a relationship with him would only disrupt their stability. Karen's focus on the children's well-being brought clarity. This wasn't just about proving my role as their father. It was about protecting the life we had built together. The case was strong, but it would require every ounce of resolve I had. Later that night, as I tucked Noah into bed, he asked me if I would let Richard take them. The worry in his voice broke my heart. Sitting beside him, I promised with all the certainty I could muster that I wouldn't let that happen. I reminded him that he and his siblings were my world and that I would fight for them no matter what. His small arms wrapped around me in relief, and I held him close, vowing silently to keep that promise. As I left his room, the weight of the situation didn't feel as heavy. Richard and Margot might think they could rewrite the story of our family, but they underestimated the strength of the bond one had with my kids. It wasn't just a connection. It was a fortress, and I was ready to defend it. The day of the court hearing arrived faster than I'd anticipated. That morning, I meticulously reviewed everything, documents, notes, and the detailed schedules Karen had helped me prepare. Bella volunteered to accompany me, her quiet determination a source of strength, while Adam and Noah stayed with a family friend, shielded from the tension of the day. They didn't need to hear firsthand what Richard was demanding. The courtroom was colder than I'd expected, sterile and unfeeling. Margot and Richard sat at their table, their lawyer leaning in to whisper something as I entered. Margot avoided looking at me, but Richard's smug confidence was palpable. His expression alone was enough to make my blood boil, but Karen's steadying presence reminded me to keep my focus. As the hearing began, Richard's lawyer launched into a polished argument, presenting his client as a devoted biological father, simply seeking a chance to connect with his children. The narrative was carefully crafted, portraying Richard as someone who deeply cared about Adam and Noah, despite his years of absence. Karen, composed and methodical, countered with the truth. She emphasized the stability and care I had provided as the boys' sole parent for 14 years. Her argument was supported by statements Adam and Noah had helped shape, evidence of their routines, and the clear emotional harm that forcing a relationship with Richard could bring. She didn't just tell the court about the disruption Margot and Richard had already caused, she showed them. Margot took the stand next. Her attempt at poise faltered as she spoke. She admitted to mistakes but framed her actions as being motivated by what she believed was best for the boys. She claimed they deserved to know their real father, insisting this wasn't about replacing me, but adding more love to their lives. Her words felt hollow, and even the judge's neutral expression hinted at skepticism. Finally, it was my turn. Standing before the court, I felt the weight of the moment pressing down on me. I spoke from the heart, recounting the years I had devoted to my sons. I described the countless moments that made up a life, teaching them to ride bikes, helping with school projects, and staying up all night when they were sick. I wasn't just a figure in their lives. I was their father in every way that mattered. I made it clear that this wasn't about denying Richard a connection, but protecting my children from unnecessary disruption. They had expressed their wishes, and those wishes deserved to be honored. As I returned to my seat, Bella's quiet squeeze of my hand reminded me I wasn't alone in this fight. The judge deliberated briefly before delivering the decision. While acknowledging Richard's biological connection, The court ruled that the boys' emotional well-being and stability took precedence. Forcing a new father figure into their lives, particularly against their wishes, was deemed not in their best interest. The petition for visitation was denied. Relief washed over me as the words sank in. Richard's confidence visibly cracked, and Margot's carefully controlled expression gave way to uncertainty. For the first time, it seemed they were confronting the consequences of their actions. As we left the courtroom, Karen offered a small smile, her voice steady but kind as she reassured me of what we had accomplished. When Bella and I returned home, Adam and Noah greeted us eagerly, their joy unclouded by the day's events. Hugging them tightly, I felt a certainty I hadn't in weeks. We were going to be okay. In the months that followed, life began to settle into a new rhythm. Bella found solace and expression in her art, her paintings reflecting both the pain and resilience of the past months. Adam and Noah grew closer, their bond unshaken by the upheaval. They leaned on each other, on Bella, and on me, rediscovering the comfort of stability. Margot's occasional attempts at contact felt half-hearted, as though even she recognized the damage couldn't be undone. Richard, for all his initial bluster, receded into the background, his influence rejected both by the court and by the boys. Our family wasn't perfect, but it was ours. On quiet evenings filled with laughter and shared moments, I allowed myself to believe in the future again. We had weathered the worst, and as I watched my children thrive, I knew one thing for certain. We had built something stronger than anything Margot or Richard could destroy. Together, we were moving forward, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead.